All right, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's show, Disability Visibility, a virtual book discussion with Alice Wong and Sandy Ho. I am Steve Slinsky. I have been the ones y'all got some emails from about tonight's show, and I work at Partners for Youth with Disabilities. We are a nonprofit based in Boston, and our mission is to create a world where young people with disabilities can lead self-determined lives filled with dignity, pride, and purpose. We have a variety of youth programs in the Boston area, and then we also work with organizations and individuals to help them become more inclusive of people with disabilities in the work that they do. I'm really excited for tonight's show, but before I hand it over to our presenters for tonight, I want to give a little bit of a walkthrough of the room you're in so folks know how to engage tonight in the best way that works for them. So we do have live captions for tonight's show. On the bottom section of your screen, there's a CC button, Start Closed Captions. If you would like to turn on or off closed captions throughout the show, you can toggle them on or off there. Thanks to our captioner, Gianna, for doing them. We also have ASL interpreting for tonight's show, our ASL interpreter, Michael. If you would like to make, at any point in tonight's show, if you would like to make the webcams larger or smaller, you have the ability to customize your own screen. You can minimize the little display area where I have the little welcome to tonight's webinar display. You can minimize that and make the webcams bigger. You can also make any in particular webcam full screen if you want to just see that. Additionally, we will be doing, so Alice and Sandy will be discussing for about probably the first 45 minutes of tonight's show. But then over the last 15 to 20 minutes, we'll be taking questions and answers from the audience. So if you have reactions, thoughts, questions throughout tonight's show, throw them in the public chat section on the left-hand side of the screen. And there's a section called Public Chat under Messages. You can always always leave questions throughout the show. I'll be taking them down, and then we'll then be asking them to Alice and Sandy at the end. If you would like to at the end to share, if you are deaf and would like to share your question through ASL, well, I'll go over that at the end too. But you can always use the raise hand feature to kind of virtually raise your hand or type in the public chat area as well, and we can make it so you can turn your webcam on. We can do it that way too. All right, and then final thing before I hand it off to Alice and Sandy is, we are here tonight to talk about the book Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century. And as part of the show, we are doing a book raffle. We're raffling off 5 copies of the book to folks who registered. And so I want to announce the winners of our raffle. So congratulations to Susanna Hong, Priyanka Bhakta, Ellie Immerman, Valerie Mitchell, and Tamara Sanchez Monter. Apologies, Michael. I just realized I'm making you write all of them. All right. Yes, congratulations to our winners. I'll be in touch with you through email about how to receive your copy. And finally, I'm excited to introduce our presenters for tonight. Alice Wong is a disabled activist, media maker, and consultant. She is the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating, sharing, and amplifying disabled media and culture, created in 2014. And Sandy Ho is a disability community organizer, activist, and disability policy researcher. Currently, she is a research associate at the Lurie Institute for Disability Policy at Brandeis University, where she manages the Community Living Policy Center. And she's the founder of the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, a biennial national conference organized by disabled activists that centers marginalized disabled people. So I got my copy of Disability Visibility in the mail a little bit late because of all the post office delays. I'm about halfway through and absolutely loving it. I am very excited for Alice and Sandy's discussion. So Alice and Sandy, take it away.
Hey. Hello, Fred.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Sandy. So this is going to be a fun discussion.
Yeah, totally. Before we get into the discussion, do you want to give an image description for access? You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Alice Wong. I'm an Asian American disabled woman. I am wearing a navy hoodie. Behind me is pretty much a dark background, so you can't see much behind me. I have short black hair. There is a mask over my nose attached to a gray tube to my ventilator. That's about it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Ho, and I am a queer disabled Asian American woman. I have dark hair. I am wearing a black t-shirt that says ableism is trash, that has splattering of colors behind it. I'm also coming to you from the playroom, from my nephew's playroom in Boston. So my background right now, right behind my head is a ton of various stuffed animals. And yeah, that's it. Should we get into the first question?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. So Alice, you and I first met each other because I was searching for a community of women with disabilities, and the rest, as they say, is history. But one thing that I have really deeply loved and appreciated about our friendship is the way that we uplift each other about the small things and also the big wins. So in this context of the pandemic, people with disabilities are really experiencing a variety of challenges when it comes to getting together and meeting up. I was wondering if you had any insights or advice on ways that people can still maintain friendship and also continue being in community together.
Yeah, I think it's been very hard for a lot of people in our community. I think isolation has always been one of the biggest barriers, even, before the pandemic, whether it's we're not comfortable yet identifying or we're kind of, hesitant or like finding community or engaging with the community. So those things are already, part of our world. And, the pandemic has really created more structural barriers for a lot of people who really do need that kind of face-to-face personal interaction. I think there's a lot of people with mental disabilities and other disabilities where, they don't have the same access to counseling services and a lot of things that's really going to be, super difficult. So I think it's a very, challenging time for everyone. But I do think, just speaking for myself, much of the way I socialize hasn't changed all that much because, like some disabled folks, like a lot of my life is connected through the online world, and the transition from being in person and, let's say, going to school or going to work. Most of my work has already been remote for years, and most of my relationships outside of work for fun, for activism is been mainly through social media. So for me, the challenge, the transition hasn't been that hard, but I understand that it's rough for a lot of people because it's a scary world. We all have to kind of figure out how we're going to survive, and shelter in place is not a joke. The way this country is going in terms of the increases, the surges across states, I mean, it's really scary, and I think there's a lot of fear right now that so many of us in our community are struggling, whether it's housing, whether it's like financial strain. So I feel like this is the time we really need to kind of support one another. And for me, it's been kind of the way I've got to support is really kind of old fashioned. Like I have text messages, like I have chat threads with a lot of friends, and that keeps me going. These little like joking things and just like sending each other emojis. They keep me, they keep me afloat. I do check in with some friends who I haven't heard from in a while. So I'll do that to say, hey, are you okay? How are things going? So I try to do that, and I know people have done people have done that with me as well, and I really feel like that's a form of love and care, which is really nice. And yeah, I think it's really difficult, and I think people are finding whatever ways work for them because clearly internet access is still an intense privilege, immense privilege. A lot of people in rural areas don't have the Wi-Fi or broadband services, so that's something also to be really mindful of. So, Sandy, I'm going to ask you a question. So, I think I'm trying to remember, but I think we first met through an email from you to me about your project Letters to Thrive. So, can you clarify my hazy memory and let me know was that how we met? And also tell me about your project Letters to Thrive because I do remember you telling me about it, and it was really just so exciting because I love the entire idea of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to say it was around 2012. And I was reaching out to disabled women in the community. Much of it were the kind of cold call emails. And I think that I maybe have a little bit of a reputation of doing that. Of just finding people who, like yourself, have roles in our disability community that are both mentorship, but also are sharing wisdom and lessons to younger disabled youth and up and coming leaders in our community. And so the Letters to Thrive project started because I was the program coordinator of a mentoring program called Thrive. And this is based in Massachusetts, where for young women with disabilities to be mentored by older disabled women in the state. And younger women, were between the ages of, I think, 14 to 26. Which, by the way, at that time was just around the age that I was, of 26, I think. And so it was a strange time for me because I was very much kind of thought to myself as a mentee in some sense. And so my reaching out was also sort of my desire to seek my own mentors. But this project started as a way to have the mentees and mentors get to know each other. So I asked them to write letters to their younger selves. And then with their permission, I posted it on Tumblr, which, back in the day when Tumblr was a more, I think, active platform. And then before I knew it, other disabled women from across the country and then around the world started submitting their letters as well, and so it kind of just took off. But I remember emailing you because I was like, wow, I don't know any other Asian American disabled women in my life at that time. And I just had read about you a little bit. I think the Disability Project had just kind of started at that time. I want to say, I had read your blogs, I think, as well. And so I emailed you, and I just remember my first impression of being like, how incredibly open and warm and welcoming to me you were, and my sort of uncertainties around talking about being a disabled woman. And I want to emphasize that the context of that conversation, of that initial meeting between us, happened outside of like the typical youth programs. I would say, I had parents and guidance counselors and teachers in schools who would be like, "Oh, you should go meet up with other kids or other disabled adults, and like there's this program." And I was always kind of hesitant about it, and I was like, I don't, whatever, I don't know why. And so I think it was at that point in my life where I was ready to find community, and I was ready to start asking myself the questions about what kind of role did I want to have, or what existed out there already as well. So,
Yeah, I remember, I think, all of us are in these different journeys, right? I think maybe a lot of people in this on this webinar, maybe they're just not ready yet, or just still working through their stuff. And I've been there too, and I think that's why in my mind, visibility is really important, because just knowing that there are other people out there, maybe sort of like you, or just doing interesting things, or doing like things you never thought of. I think that's really helpful in terms of, especially younger people or people new to the disability community, saying, "Oh, there's so much more that's there."
Mhm.
It's not to say that you have to be similar. It's the idea that there's choice, there's space. I think that's really important for people to know that it's limitless. And I think it's really counter to what's the current kind of representation we have. Whether it's in mainstream media or pop culture. So I do think through the internet and social media, there are a lot of marginalized communities, such as the disability community, has really been able to to show up the ways that we want to show up. I think even though the internet is trash, I do think that it's given a lot of us a platform that we wouldn't have. I know that, for myself, I think, yeah, I mean, it's really given me access and a way to tell my story in a way that I want to tell it, but also a way to reach out to people. And, I learned so much from the other disabled people that I follow, on Twitter, for example, or Instagram. And yeah, so I think I remember your Letters to Thrive projects, and you asking me whether I just submit something. And at that time, I had a essay published in a Asian American journal where they had a special issue on disability and illness. And that was one of the first times I think I wrote a personal essay that was in my kind of adulthood years about my origins, I guess. And it's sort of like a real sort of formative experience. You had to sort of put into words all these things about both Asian American and disabled. Then I was like, hey, Sandy, I wrote this. It fits. I think it fits with the mission of Letters to Thrive, and I think you posted it. I think that was also really great because it's in an academic journal. Not many people are gonna not many people might read it, but you were able to put it on your Tumblr, and that was really fun. And I think like I grew up not knowing that many Asian Americans with disabilities either. A few years ago, for the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Smithsonian, there's a Asia Pacific American blog for the Smithsonian, and they asked me to write a blog post for them. And basically, the title of my blog post was like, not a unicorn, because in many spaces, I feel like, especially disability spaces, like, I feel like I'm often the only one as an Asian American disabled woman. And then when I see others, they're like, oh my gosh, like, so it's always fun to discover other folks. And there's actually like a lot of people out there. It's just not, it's just harder to find sometimes. So it's always exciting to meet people like you. To the fact that we became friends, I think, just because we're both Asian American and disabled doesn't mean that we're going to be like instant friends, right? I don't think that's like, that's not the expectation I have. But, sometimes it does work out for like, we become instant buddies, and I'm just so grateful for that. So I think that is a phenomenon that does happen a lot, where when you meet some people, sometimes it's just like it is the connection, and I think that's what's for youth especially, that's so incredibly powerful. I wonder all the time, like, what would it been like if I was a teenager or a kid and I had a best friend who's disabled. I can honestly tell you, I didn't ever have a best friend that was disabled as a young kid. I didn't have parents that were disabled, and just wonder what that would have been like. Just nowadays, I do hope that things are better now. I mean, I have to believe things are better, but it can still be really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that after our first conversation, I remember, adding your name to my growing list of disabled women in community that I had probably labeled something like people I want to grow up to be like. And but as as we have become friends and closer over the years, the opportunities to meet other leaders in the community, and just like as you were saying, other examples of ways of being and taking up space and like showing up in our community has just been some of the best things that I appreciate about our friendship together. So, the next question. So you write in the dedication of the book, and I'm gonna read it. To my younger self and all the disabled kids today who can't imagine their futures. The world is ours, and this is for all of us. So I was wondering if, first of all, that was one of the most incredible and powerful dedications of book that I've read, and I consider myself to be a bookworm. But that being said, though, when we think about the world visioning and world building work that still needs so much work, it needs to be done around it. How can programs that work with youth with disabilities, whether in mentoring or recreation or career development or youth leadership, help contribute to that future world that belongs to all of us that you are referring to in your dedication?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to go about it. Number one, I think, is just give as much control to the disabled youth to drive the programs, to drive, like, what do they want to explore? What do they want to learn about? Give them as much agency to lead and the freedom to mess around, right? To get weird, to make mistakes. I think sometimes, service provision has to be this very kind of controlled and organized thing. And, a lot of, friendships and networks don't happen in this linear pattern, right? There's not a nice, neat, beginning or end. And sometimes these things have to happen organically. Sometimes you can't force this thing to happen. So I think there's some of those kind of like understandings of what it takes to build this network, because I think if it's not coming from a genuine place, it's very hard to make that happen, even though I think there are a lot of nonprofits and advocacy groups that work really hard at this. I think that's definitely one aspect of it where you do have to be very intentional, right, about creating spaces. And I think, even within the disability community, I mean, there are so many groups that are kind of like siloed. So I think that's another aspect too, to think about who's missing. There's a lot of barriers and other kinds of issues where other disabled people don't want to associate with other disabled people. So I think there's those kind of layers as well. And often access needs, making sure that whatever program or space or service you're providing is as accessible as possible. I think, sometimes that is very tricky, but there are conflicting access needs, but I think there's, always the kind of spirit of creating as much access as possible. And I do think that, total access is not a reality, I don't think. But people can at least make the effort to make things as accessible as possible. So, I think first, the most important thing is to listen to what younger disabled people want and where their interests are. And I think to let them lead, because, if it's not really something that resonates with their life, they're not going to want to engage,
Yeah, absolutely. I think, growing up during the passage of the ADA and IDEA, and until now, we hear so much of this emphasis on transition to independent living and, housing, education, employment, and then like you get your own apartment, and that is somehow, the goal for all young people with disabilities. And I remember back to my days of working in that mentoring program and thinking, well, a lot of other things need to happen in order for those other pieces to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I remember like reading the letters from the young women, and the things that they wrote about were like body image. Why aren't there any mannequins in the shopping malls that look like my body? Or questions about being a mom, or is it even possible, or how do you talk to your personal care attendant who might be your mom or dad about reproductive health, about having sex, and those never quite show up on like your broke rehab counselors, like transitional living plan. But they were necessary to talk about, because I think forming that identity, that sense of who you are, matters in order to navigate the rest of the transitional period that we are also going through.
Yeah, I mean, adulting is not fun.
Yeah.
Adulting is hard.
Yeah.
I feel like adulting is just, I'm trying to figure stuff out. I'm 46, people, and I know 46 sounds ancient, and it is, but I'm proud of being 46 because I'm still alive. But yeah, adulting is, not fun. But I do think being disabled adulting is a whole other thing as well.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's why stories really matter, right? Stories by disabled people about the realities of their life, the good, the bad, the joy, the difficulty, the pain, but everything in between.
Yeah.
And that gives us a portal, a way to see, like, oh, what are some lessons that I can get away from this, even if I don't have a direct relationship with, a disabled mentor, right? Like, you can read, or watch videos by disabled parents talking about pregnancy or just parenting or the ways that they adapt their, nursery, things like that. There's disabled scientists, talking about how they got into grad school or how they do lab work. There's so many different ways of like learning and also getting that kind of informal mentorship, by just reading their stories. I think that's why, I personally gravitate towards stories because I think that is how I first learned about the disability community before I ever kind of went to a event, right? Before I ever went into an in-person space full of disabled people. I learned by reading, work by disabled people. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why, I edited this anthology is to really just present a snapshot of like what the lived experience of disability is in the first 19 years of the 21st century. So it's really just a small sample of issues and the kind of people that I find incredibly powerful and interesting that I want to share with the world. So, it's just a very personal collection in terms of just the people that I wanted to try to uplift. And, I just hope it encourages people to discover more. Just it's not supposed to be, you know, uh, definitive. It's not. This is what it's like. I would never. That's impossible. And I made that really clear in the introduction that this is more of a deeper dive and a very kind of specific collection through by lens, by choices. And in the back of the book, I do have a list of additional readings and resources. So I do hope that people, one of the goals is hopefully people get excited, right? Like that if they do read all or a few of the essays that they want to learn more, that there's a whole list of folks afterwards that at the back of the book that they can just continue this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the lens in which you created this book and the choices that you intentionally made in creating it, so the collection is organized into 4 sections. being, becoming, doing, and connecting. And I wanted to ask you why those 4 sections. Because you were creating this book, this collection, way before a lot of the present challenges that we're experiencing now were even on the radar. And so how do you see those 4 sections playing out in what is happening in our country right now?
Wow, that's a packed question. I will try to address as many of them as possible. So the 4 sections are really by way of just like organizing them. I think of them as different phases or like states of being, like action, It's because these essays are really diverse in terms of subject matter. So there wasn't going to be an entire section on relationships or work or activism. There are like, maybe 1 or 2 that you categorize by subjects. And I didn't want to even break it down by subject because I thought, that's kind of basic. But what are some other larger thematic ways to talk about these essays? And, there were some essays that are definitely both, being and becoming, but I had to find some sort of way to organize them. And I do feel like some of the things about my experience as being a disabled person did, really encapsulate to these kind of ideas of what does it mean to be disabled? What is the process of becoming something, right? Whether it's disabled and plus other things. I think becoming is such a rich idea. It's a rich concept. Doing really captures a lot of the essays by people who are just doing really amazing things. That's a really great way to talk about like people's careers or things that they care about. And connecting, I think, was intentional at the very end because again we're trying to circulate back to like community. So making connections, whether it's connections across movements, connections within our communities, other kinds of connections. So I feel like, being and becoming is kind of like this individual kind of beginning, and then connecting gets you to this larger social context.
So as you were explaining that, it's very obvious and clear to me why you are also such a skilled qualitative analysis person. Like your coding skills must have been off the charts. So I do appreciate that you went into such great detail in that explanation.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for noticing that.
Yeah. So I think
Well, hey,
you had something to say?
well, before we wrap up, I want to ask you to talk about your essay because I want people to know that Sandy is in the anthology. And I know we're going to have questions in about 5 to 10 minutes. But why don't you tell us about the essay that you have in the anthology and why you wrote it? Because it is such a, I love it, but I think I'm going to let you kind of talk about it because I want people to know about it.
Sure. So the essay broadly is situated around the story and the origin story behind my name, Ho Chi Minh and also Sandy Ho. And I knew that I have always wanted to write that origin story, just because in my gut it was that idea of I thought I knew everything there was to know about the origin story of my name, but I also, a part of me knew until I put it on paper, like I'm not gonna really fully understand it. But so the essay starts off with the birth of my eldest nephew, whose playroom I am sitting in today. And our family's meeting the new baby, and then my mom makes kind of like a weird ableist comment. And so, like, I think many of us, when we find ourselves in this situation with our family members, with our closest loved ones, and we hear comments being made, we're not really quite sure what to do with it in that moment. And I basically buried it and kept it in the back of my mind. Like, okay, someday I'm going to deal with this. And that someday happened to be the essay that I wrote. And I think that so the essay kind of has two cracks. It creates the history of not just my family being East Asian refugees and immigrants, but also in that story is my family's grappling with disability. Like before I was ever even an idea in my family, before my parents had ever met, like decades before all of that happened, disability was already an idea that had influenced the way my mom views disabled people, and it was already an idea that was being shaped culturally for people in my family. And so by the time, I was born in the late 80s in the US, like halfway across the world, all of these things added to the way I not only view myself growing up, but also, later on as a community organizer and as a disabled activist now, how I approach the work that I do in the community. I remember being told very frankly as a child that our family had a choice to make about me. They were either going to leave me at the hospital because as a disabled girl, like that is what my family believed and perceptions, that was one option for them, or they would raise me as their daughter. And I think these threads tie into the political identity of being queer Asian American disabled woman. And it wasn't until very much later on when I had finally written the essay. I had used many, many drafts of it early on. And I remember you had pushed me to write my Chinese name and spell it out phonetically in English. And I was like, oh, okay. And that really sort of saying it's okay to show up, not just in the ways that we are expected to, but that is a part of our history, that is a part of our culture, that is a part of our story as well. So all of this has informed so much of the Disability and Intersectionality Summit. I think because of the language choices that we choose to use to identify ourselves.
And I think, as I remember, not to interrupt you, but I think in one of my earlier, as you created the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, which I hope everybody checks out their website for the summit for 2021. I remember I did a Q&A with you for my website because I wanted to help spread the word out, especially the very first year that you established it. And I believe you told me that this was the first time you identified as queer. Is that correct?
That is also true. I think, publicly on paper, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was kind of, that is still something that I am working to understand today. And the thing about having written the essay down, and also going back to what you said earlier too about how these stories are just, some of the options, some of the examples that exist. I am not naive to the fact that, I expect that the origin story of my name to continue to impact the things that I do, to continue to change my story and also how I identify as I continue to, do that next project and that next adventure. I had no idea. I didn't expect that me being an aunt on that day would, also impact the way that I view myself as a disabled woman. And I think that, will continue to happen, and I'm totally open to it. But absolutely, like, I think having written that story down, it is sort of just like the culmination of, okay, this is who I am right now, but there's more to come.
Yeah, we're all works in progress, right? I think, but I do remember you telling me, like, hey, like, after I did that Q&A, you were like, this is one of the first times I really, fully identify as queer, disabled, and Asian American. And,
Yeah.
I felt such a, I felt real, I was humbled by that because you were comfortable enough to do that, and I think that was just pretty awesome. And I think about also just, again, we're creating these stories and media out there, and we don't know, like, who's going to read it these days. I just, the ripple effect. I think the more, honest we are about our lives, that we just have no idea down the road, like years later, generations later, who it might touch. And I think that's really, a cool thing. I think that's one thing that keeps me going, is that we're creating worlds for ourselves, but really it's also for the future, right? It's not just for our immediate needs, but it's really about showing multiple pathways, or just, there's a whole multi-universe that's out there for anybody. And I do, not to get dirty, but yeah, I mean, there is a multiverse. And we just step into these different universes at any time.
Well, time, and I do want to make sure that we give a few minutes for people to ask questions.
Hey, I can jump back in then. Hello. I could just listen to y'all go all day. But yeah, so we have some great questions in the chat. So I will, full disclosure for folks in the chat, I'm gonna bounce around a little. I may not get to everyone's questions, but please feel free to throw questions in the chat if you would like to share your question through ASL. There, if you click on your name on the user list, you can raise your hand, do a little raise hand feature. So if you'd like to share with ASL, do that, and then I'll make it so you can share your webcam. So first question, kind of building off one of the last, Sandy, you talking about your essay a little bit. Josh has a question about, you can totally relate around disability and family to what you were sharing. And his question is around, like, I think this is a question for either you, it's just how do you deal with today with like ableism in your family, and folks who are really close with you, but maybe aren't willing to accept all aspects of your identity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had a definitive answer for it all. But I mean, one way that I deal with the ableism that is both among my family or even close friends in the disability community as well is finding my people. And Alice being one of them. But I think it's really, really important to not just find community, but then like within that, like who are going to be your champions, your cheerleaders, the people who are going to, share your joys and like all the big wins and the small ones as well. And that helps to deal with disappointment that that ableism brings, but it also, you know, talking about it with those folks can provide suggestions or support around like how to navigate those conversations. It isn't easy. I struggle with it every single time. I don't always succeed. There's still a lot of work that my family has to do. But you know, I have the support to do that continuation of the work.
Great. And then another question for you from Owen. What do you think you, and I think this is a question for both of you, so I'd also be curious on both of your perspectives on this, but like, what do you think you would write about or do with your time in a world without ableism?
Alice, I throw that to you because I want to know what you would do.
Oh gosh, I mean, it could be like so many things. I think if we, as disabled people, did not have to deal with ableism, we would really be, in one sense, free to really be ourselves. And can you imagine, like, all the time and energy we would save that we would have to really pursue what we want to do? I mean, that to me is like the, you know, that's the end goal of justice and liberation, not just for us, but for everyone. And yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason I'm so into the future. Like, I just am, you know, I still am hopeful. You know, I think even though things are really tough right now, you know, we see not just in this country, but just around the world the fight for Black lives, you know, against white supremacy, you know, against police brutality and violence. But, you know, that plus the coronavirus pandemic, it just, you know, overall kind of continued assault on disability rights and justice. You know, this is a very long struggle, and you know, we can only get there through solidarity with one another and collective action. But I do think, you know, gosh, I would probably be writing a cookbook or, you know, doing something fun, you know, but we can do both. I think that's another thing too. It's really important for people to live in their joy, to just do what they want to do. Like I really reject the idea that disabled people have to be advocates. Like, you know, I totally get it. Like sometimes you have no choice to be an advocate for yourself, but you are not obligated to do anything that you don't want to do. And I think that's really, if there's one message to disabled youth out there, it's like, there's no one way to be. And like, don't let anybody tell you what you have to do X, Y, Z to be part of the community. Like, I think that's all BS. And, you know, if you want to just like be a slacker, you know? If you want to just, you know, get into manga comics, go for it. You know, you don't have to like do stuff about disability just because you're disabled. And I just want to emphasize that. Yeah, just find your joy wherever you can find it too.
Yeah, I think just to jump in myself, I think that's a really powerful thing because I frequently will see online and elsewhere disabled people, queer people share their story or share experiences they've had and be labeled by others as activists. Well, they're not necessarily like they're not really engaging in activism per se. They're just literally just like saying this is my experience, and then that is a label that gets put on them. We're like, hey, that we shouldn't expect that of everyone, or like that shouldn't be a burden that everyone has to carry unless they want to. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's still the work ahead. We're like, because we're not centered yet. You know, our stories are still seen as, you know, activism or advocacy. And I think, you know, that is powerful, but also the expectations are kind of emblematic of like where the power relations are and how much work we have to do. Because I think, yeah, that is part of the reason why we need to keep fighting.
All right. So we probably have time for maybe 2 more quick questions. And so a question from Carl, who's joining us from the UK. Hey, Carl. Saying a question for Alice as an editor and Sandy as a contributor and reader. What was the most surprising aspect of the book for you both?
Hey, Carl. Thanks for being part of this webinar from the UK. I'm delighted. So it's been about a month or about 5 weeks since the book came out, and I was pretty nervous. I didn't know, how it would be received. I worked on it for over a year and a half, and I didn't really talk much about it or get a lot of feedback on it because I wanted to just, do my thing without outside, influence. So it's kind of nerve-wracking, because what I care about may not be what's, it's just what I care about. So like, there's a very personal thing and kind of scary to release into the world. But I do think that it's been overwhelmingly amazing to see the way both disabled and non-disabled people have responded to the book. I don't want to overhype it, but I think it's speaking to a need. It's really filling a need right now, and there is a hunger for these kinds of things, and it's just been so gratifying to see. And I do hope that it becomes, part of people's libraries, on their bookshelves, on their syllabus. I hope teachers assign this book. I really do feel like there's hopefully a lot of use for it. It just, yeah. So that's been really so amazing. And I'm continually blown away by people's reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add to what Alice has said in terms of surprising aspects, but I think just on a personal level, it has been incredible to read the messages from friends that, aren't even necessarily directly involved in the disability community, but have picked it up and were like, hey, I saw your name in the table of contents for this book, and I read your piece, and I learned so much more about you. To the fact that the way this book has embodied, so it's not just about the content addressing disability issues, but like the way that it takes up space in the publishing world too. Like it was surprising to me, and I learned so much from the way that Alice went about this. Providing all forms of access, including the plain language version of that book. Like it wasn't even something that I had thought about, and so I've been astonished and pleased by the way that has to ripple in our community and like the way things are done. Which is something that Alice is always doing, no matter what she does. She like pushes the boundaries and raises the bar for all of us. So
Yeah, I do want to mention to folks if there's a free discussion guide. So like I worked with a disabled writer named Naomi Ortiz, and she wrote a discussion guide. So like if you have a book discussion group or just want to read it with your friends, there's a really great guide that's available on my website that you can use. So I think, I wanted to get as much bang for my buck in terms of like, if this is the only chance I get a book out, what are the ways I can open up access to it? So that is why I worked with 2 disabled writers with a plain language guide and a discussion guide, because I really wanted the book to be a tool, just a way to really be a tool for discussion and reflection and action.
Awesome. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. There were some other really great questions in the chat. I'm sorry to all of those that were not getting to your questions. One last thing that Lucy mentioned this earlier, and I think this is a very brief thing that would be a great thing to close on. But what is a way that folks here today or new people to a lot of this work could support the work that you're doing going forward?
Yeah, did you want to mention that your summit? Or I don't know.
Yeah.
You go first.
Well, so the Disability and Intersectionality Summit will be held in 2021. Further details to come. But one way that conference, which is organized by disabled people from across the country, and it's a conference where other marginalized, disabled, Black, Indigenous people of color are the presenters on whatever they want to present on. It doesn't necessarily have to be about disability issues. All of the past conference sessions from 2016 and 2018, those are on YouTube. One way to help would be to watch those, to share them with your friends, with your classmates, and to get the word out about the conference, and to continue to uplift and amplify the work of disabled communities.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a chance to plug something, I guess I'll just mention my website, which is disabilityvisibilityproject.com. On my website, you'll find just essays by disabled people. I'll do Q&As with folks. I have a podcast. This past July, I published 13 essays by disabled people of color about the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So, if you're interested, check out my website. There's also, if you have the means, but you're not, there's no expectation, you can also support my work financially. So there's a Patreon link and a PayPal link, but just, again, feel free to share the stories, subscribe to my podcast if podcasts are your thing. And if you are interested, just buy the book or read the book at the library and share the word if you're interested. And thank you for considering it.
Awesome. Well, we are already a few minutes over, so I think I'll kind of wrap it there. But thank you. Number one, I just want to thank Alice and Sandy. Thank you both for sharing with us today. I think folks here could have kept listening to y'all and had this going for much longer. It was so engaging. I know I took a lot from it. I hope others did as well. I've shared links that you just talked over in the chat. I will be in my email out to folks afterwards. I'll share a recording. We'll be sharing transcripts of this. We'll also then, the resources that folks mentioned, that Alice and Sandy mentioned, I'll include that, as well as a link of how to purchase the book, because it looks like that's a question that's already come up in the chat. So yes, we will, but you can also link to purchase, you can find on Alice's website. So go there, disabilityvisibilityproject.com. Buy that book because it's awesome. And Terrence, shut up and take my money. Yes, there you go. So yeah, I'll send all that out in the email. We'll be out probably early next week once all the recording has had a chance to finish.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Steve. And thank you,
Thank you, interpreter.
Yes, thank you, Michael and Gianna for our captioning and cart, or for captioning and ASL.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good night or good morning.